Good evening. The White House is now pushing a markedly harder stance, urging lawmakers to craft a bill that would punish any government keeping open commercial channels with Moscow. Well, officials say the measures would be very severe, though no details have yet been published. We'll look at what this could mean for countries balancing long-standing partnerships. First, let's take a look at this report.
Republican lawmakers in Washington are preparing a new bill that would introduce some of the toughest sanctions yet against countries maintaining economic ties with Russia. And US officials say Iran could soon be added to that list. Speaking to reporters in Florida, President Donald Trump confirmed that the proposal is moving forward.
Well, I hear they're doing that, and that's okay with me. They're passing legislation, or the Republicans are putting in legislation that very tough. It's sanctioning, et cetera, on any country doing business with Russia. They may add Iran to that, as you know. I suggested it. So any country that does business with Russia will be very severely sanctioned. We may add Iran to the formula, yeah.
The push comes as the Trump administration prepares to enforce new sanctions on Russia's energy sector, including measures targeting Lukoil and state-owned Rosneft, set to take effect on November 21st. The United States has also imposed additional tariffs on Indian goods over New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil, raising total duties to 50%. Russia has dismissed the growing pressure. President Vladimir Putin recently said the sanctions would not significantly impact Russia's economy, warning that any disruption to global oil supply could also hurt Washington.
Well, joining me now to get all the details is our correspondent Andy Mioch. Andy, good to have you here in the studio. What are they saying, the White House, then, about this sanctions plan? And what are they giving in terms of a reason as to why they're doing it?
Well, Guy, as for the specifics, all we really have to go on for now is what we've heard from U.S. President Donald Trump saying that he's okay with the legislation in the Senate that envisions sanctions on countries doing business with Russia. He was fielding reporters' questions on the tarmac when he was leaving Florida for the White House, and as we heard in the package, he said those sanctions on those nations would be very severe. Just before we get into the little bits, a quick word on the bill itself. It would allow the president to impose tariffs of up to 500% on the import of goods from countries that buy Russian energy or do not actively support Ukraine in its war with Russia. This specifically targets major consumers of Russian energy, such as China and India. But as we've heard, Trump also said that Iran might get added to the list. This is widely seen as Trump's hint that he is backing this bill, and this comes after the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, said last month he's ready to bring the legislation in the Senate to a vote. At the time, however, he did not specify any timeline, indicating that the bill has been put on hold. At that time, Politico reported that the bill is on ice as everyone was waiting for the results of the planned Trump-Putin meeting in Budapest. And as we can all remember, those plans failed and were shelved. Trump said, canceling the summit, that every time he speaks to Russia's Vladimir Putin, that they always have a good conversation that goes nowhere. After that, of course, he slapped sanctions on two of Russia's major oil producers, Lukoil and Rosneft, and those sanctions, by the way, are the first Ukraine-related sanctions imposed during Trump's second term. Russia's Putin, of course, responded saying that those sanctions are an unfriendly act, admitting they would have certain consequences for the Russian economy, but that they would not be as great.
And Andy, why does there have to be a bill? Often with President Trump, we hear, don't we, that he would rather take decisions, get things done himself without relying on the other politicians to sort of support him and win over their support. What is the role that Congress needs to play in this?
Well, this bill is a bipartisan bill. Its backers, the Senators Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Democrat Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Currently, it has a bit more than 80 co-sponsors in the Senate and about 100 in the House of Representatives. That just paints a picture of how strong of a message it would be if it is indeed passed. The bill itself stipulates that it would take effect if the U.S. president determined that Russia is refusing to negotiate a peace deal with Ukraine, violating any possible future peace agreement, or taking further aggressive actions in Ukraine. This bill has been on hold for quite some time. It was introduced back in April, and so far Trump has been hesitant to clearly support the bill. Washington has been engaged in peace efforts, arranging peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Trump himself meeting Putin in Alaska in August, and despite all of these efforts, the ceasefire in Ukraine remains elusive for now nearly 4 years.
And Andy, this this approval by Trump, this sense, to quote him, that he is okay with it, as he says, how has that been viewed by other international countries, allies of the US?
We'll get to that in a bit, but there's one important thing that happened back in September when Trump sent a quote letter to the world. The White House said that Trump in that letter said he was ready for major sanctions on Russia, given that some preconditions are met, mainly that NATO countries would stop buying Russian oil. He then described buying Russian oil by these countries as shocking. And then he also suggested that they should put 50 to 100% tariffs on China, as it's, in his words, helping the Russian war in Ukraine. Now, for the reactions on this latest development, there hasn't been too much chatter, but we can safely assume, as it was the case last month, when the U.S. sanctioned Lukoil and Rosneft, Kyiv welcomed that decision. I know I've mentioned what Putin said, but it's also worth noting what Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy head of Russia's Security Council and former president, said at the time. Let me just quickly find the quote. In October, he said, "The U.S. is our enemy, and their talkative peacemaker has now fully taken the road to war with Russia." China then also reacted, saying that, quote, "Dialogue and negotiation are the only feasible ways to resolve the Ukrainian crisis rather than coercion and pressure." The European Union, for its part, adopted its 19th sanctions package on Moscow, complete with a phased ban on all Russian energy imports. But there are, however, some outliers in the European Union, mainly Hungary, whose Prime Minister Viktor Orban was just recently in Washington trying to secure an exemption from sanctions for buying Russian oil and gas. The White House said following the meeting of the two that exemption has been granted for 1 year, and Trump said during their meeting that he would consider the option, as it's difficult for Hungary to pursue any other ways of getting oil and gas.
Now, of course, not everybody is so unanimously behind pressure on Russia. We know that India, for example, has a good relationship with the country. We've seen the roller coaster of negotiations that President Trump went on with Mr. Modi, and the relatively positive position that ended up in. How are trade relations with India, you think, impacted by this latest development?
Well, as things stand now, U.S. has imposed a 50% tariff on India, half of which is a penalty tariff for what Trump said that New Delhi is quote, fueling the war in Ukraine. At that same time, India and Russia have continued to increase their trade. Just on Sunday, both nations moved forward when it comes to talks aimed at achieving a $100 billion trade turnover by 2030 and what is called the India-Eurasian Economic Union Free Trade Agreement. The progress, as reported by Indian media, would be reviewed next month when Vladimir Putin visits Narendra Modi in New Delhi. The 50% US tariffs on Indian goods are making it hard for exporters over there to send shipments to the United States, of course. However, India is ramping up its energy cooperation with the United States in a bid to reduce its trade surplus with Washington, which was one of the key demands of the Trump administration for hammering out a deal with New Delhi. Just today, India announced a deal that will see the United States supply nearly 10% of New Delhi's liquefied petroleum gas imports. The US President Donald Trump recently said that India has largely stopped buying Russian oil, which is a claim that is yet to be backed by specific data.
And finally, we've spoken about some of the reaction from Russia. Has there been any response yet from President Putin? And if not, do we expect to hear something, do you think?
Well, not from the president himself, but we did hear from Kremlin. The Kremlin spokesman said that Moscow took a very negative view of the proposed bill. Naturally, they also added that Kremlin hopes that another summit between US President Donald Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin could take place as soon as the necessary preparations are completed. One interesting thing, the spokesman was asked by reporters, has Moscow missed an opportunity regarding that canceled summit in Budapest, and under what conditions a new meeting could happen? He said, quote, "We can hardly predict now when these conditions will arise, although of course we are all interested in these conditions occurring sooner rather than later."
Very interesting indeed. Okay, Andy, thank you so much for following that story for us. Okay, after the break, a major shift in the UK's approach to asylum is on the table, with ministers signalling a harder line on who can stay and for how long. Welcome back, you're watching PrimeTime. Now, the UK is preparing some of the most far-reaching changes to its asylum system in decades, shifting refugee status to a temporary model and stretching the path to permanent settlement to 20 years. Well, ministers say it's about restoring control of the border. AnewZ's correspondent Zainab Farazada has the details.
UK's Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood warns illegal migration is tearing our country apart. She calls it a moral mission to overhaul the UK's asylum system. Under the new plans, refugee status will become temporary, not permanent. Mahmood says protection will be reviewed every 2.5 years. Asylum seekers will no longer automatically get housing or financial support. Instead, help from the state will become discretionary, especially for people who can work or already have assets. Crucially, those arriving illegally will face a 20-year wait before applying for permanent settlement. And if a refugee's home country is later judged to be safe, their asylum status could be revoked, and they may be required to return. The government says it is taking inspiration from Denmark's model, one of the toughest in Europe, at a time when several countries are tightening their immigration policies. Rights groups have widely criticized the Danish approach and say the UK risks following the same path. Mahmood says these changes are designed to restore control to the UK's borders and reduce the pressure on local communities. But critics, including refugee charities, warn the reforms could be harsh and put vulnerable people at risk. More than 109,000 people claimed asylum in the UK in the year ending March 2025, a 17% rise on the previous year. Zainab Farazada, AnewZ, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Joining me now to discuss this in more detail is the former Mayor of Middlesbrough and the political analyst, Andy Preston. Andy, always great to see you. Thank you for joining us on PrimeTime. Huge issue this now, isn't it? Dominating discourse across the UK. Just give us a sense of what this overhaul tells us, you think, about where the UK is heading on migration at the moment.
So the UK is absolutely talking about immigration, migration, and how people settle and join in with society when they're here. And it used to be something that was almost people were a little bit scared or reluctant to talk about for feeling that they may come across as racist or divisive in some way. But it's now a mainstream conversation at bus stops, in the queue at the shops, and at dinner parties, and it's regular people that are having this conversation. There's increasing frustration. There's an increasing sense that our borders are not secure. And what's happening in people's heads, Guy, is people are seeing illegal immigration occurring, and they're seeing it happening because people are arriving on boats. It's very telegenic. I think up to 100,000 people a year are arriving illegally. It's a big number. And that looks terrifying to people. The actual number of people who move here, including illegally, is more like 6, 7, 800,000 people a year. So the illegal part of our immigration is relatively small, but nonetheless, British people confuse the two, the legal and the illegal. And the video footage on the news of people arriving on small boats is terrifying people. And there have been a small number of very bad incidents of people who've arrived and are seeking asylum where they have committed horrendous crimes. And that's led to enormous community tensions. And I think it's this that Shabana Mahmood is talking about when she says that it's tearing our country apart. It's causing a lot of friction. As a Labour politician, she's normally on the side of people who have moved here. But I think she's acknowledging the tensions and the strife that the perception of out-of-control immigration is causing.
And Andy, these new temporary protection rules, what do they actually mean in reality? And how do you think they might impact communities on the ground?
That's a really good question. I mean, the cynic in me suggests that really what Shabana Mahmood is trying to do is be seen to be tough. Her party is now the ruling government party. The Labour Party is in power. It won a majority in our voting system about a year and a half ago now. And they are deeply unpopular. And I can't stress that enough. They are the only government, to my knowledge, with a working majority that's actually regularly polled below 20% popularity in the polls. This is unprecedented for a government. And I think that what's important for them is that their name is attached to the concept of immigration and championing immigration. So I think that for her own political sake and for her party's sake, she's desperately keen to be seen to be tough and acting tough. And I fear that some of this is sound bites. Now, at the moment within the Labour Party, there's been a little bit of kickback already. This announcement of intention is only about 24 hours old, but there's already kickback amongst lots of Labour people saying that it goes too far and that it's too strong. So I think we've got to wait and see, possibly until the spring, but there'll be a lot of arguing back and forth till then when this goes to Parliament about what exactly how do we interpret what she said, because it's been fairly vague so far. I think that some of the things are certainly draconian. One of the things, Guy, that she said is talking about a 20-year process of settlement for refugees to be given indefinite leave to remain, which means you are here permanently. Now, Denmark, which is seen as the model of toughness, has, I believe, an 8-year rule. So the commentators that I'm listening to and engaging with are suggesting that she's acting very tough and talking very tough on some of these things with the intention of rowing back on some of it and giving ground to appease detractors. So we might find that the eventual bill that comes to Parliament in the spring is less strict and tough than this.
Yeah, very interesting political calculation that the government are having to make. One of the interesting elements of this debate is the human rights legislation, both European legislation and the alignment within the UK. How far do you think ministers can push this interpretation of human rights obligations before they start to run into some real problems?
Well, I think it is it Article 8 in the ECHR, which says that people have a right to a family life, and that clause, that part of the law, has been used many times to block and stop, halt repatriation of people back to where they came from, and sometimes with absurd references, but nonetheless it has worked really, really well. And what this government and the past government and a number across Europe now are talking about, either reforming the ECHR or leaving the ECHR, or possibly reinterpreting it. And that's what Shabana Mahmood and others are talking about now, is reinterpreting that, and that a family life should really only apply to a child or a parent. It shouldn't apply to somebody, for example, who's here who doesn't have kids, which it has done in the past. People who are here without kids and without a relationship have used it and just as a right to a family life to avoid repatriation from the country they came from. So I think there's a move afoot to do that. It's definitely pushing the boundaries. I'm not a lawyer, but the feedback I'm getting is that most organizations now that are subscribing to the ECHR are in a similar mindset. So if they all want to start interpreting the law slightly differently, that will probably work.
And we're also seeing some reaction from those countries that don't accept returns, aren't we? Some visa pressure. What sort of international reaction do you think we can realistically expect?
Yeah, so what Shabana Mahmood has said is that if we want to send someone back to your country because they're undesirable for some reason, you have to accept them. And if you won't accept them, as some countries don't, we will start limiting the ability of your country and ours to issue visas, so people can't travel as easily from your country to ours. Now that sounds simple, but actually it's fraught with issues, because there is always an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing relationship to do with trade, cooperations on all kinds of issues. Could be defense, all kinds of political assistance and relationships exist around the world. So starting to step up threats like that to limit visas will absolutely annoy and frustrate some countries that might be currently allies in one way or another, could damage trade, could damage cooperation on defence and other matters. So it's a very risky strategy to employ, and it should only be employed with extreme caution.
Finally, Andy, I just wanted to ask you from your own perspective, you've held public office in the UK. I'm guessing you know what it's like when policies, ideas just don't resonate with the public, and perhaps voters sometimes feel like they're not being listened to. Do you feel that Sir Keir Starmer, this current Labour leadership, is there any way back for them now when it comes to actually proving to voters that they really understand what's bothering them on this issue?
So is there a way back for the Labour Party? They're deeply unpopular. I think they are in unprecedented territory in terms of unpopularity as governments go here. Is there a way back? Well, I think it's possible they could claw their way back, Guy. I think it's very unlikely, and it'd be incredibly tough. But I think there is enough time that, given a bit of luck and an awful lot of hard work and a change of leader, they might be able to claw their way back. With Keir Starmer as an individual, I think that his position with the public is irresolvable. He is so deeply unpopular with huge numbers of the voting public, including people who vote for his own party, that he has no way of recovering and rehabilitating his own reputation. The same for his Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. So I think that it's really important for Labour, if they want to stand a chance of resolving this deep unpopularity and almost certain failure at the next general election, it's really important that they get rid of Keir Starmer quickly, because he's like a lead weight. He's so deeply unpopular that he is dragging them even further down. They're already down, but he's dragging them either further down.
Stark stuff indeed. Andy, always a joy to hear you and get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a short break now. When we're back, Katie Wilson will be with us breaking down the top business news stories of the day. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, AnewZ's Katie Wilson has joined us with the very latest business news. Katie, what have you got for us?
Well, Guy, it's been a big week in business. Samsung's gearing up a new AI chip plant, but rare earth shortages are causing headaches. Google's got a boost and Japan's economy has slipped. I've got all the details and more. Let's get started. Starting off with Samsung, who's making major changes as it prepares for soaring global demand tied to new AI technologies. The company is laying out plans for another advanced facility in Korea and discussing its broader investment strategy with top government and industry figures. It also touches on tightening supply in the chip market and the rising costs that buyers are now facing.
Samsung says it will invest hundreds of billions of dollars at home and expand its chip-making capacity amid the global boom in artificial intelligence. Samsung and Hyundai were among major South Korean companies to announce domestic investment plans on Sunday after a U.S. trade deal with South Korea sparked worries that it may weaken local manufacturing. The deal, finalized on Friday, includes a pledge by the country to invest $350 billion in U.S. strategic sectors. In a meeting with business leaders on Sunday, South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung said he was concerned that pledge may lead to domestic investment shrinking. He asked the companies to consider putting more money into their home country and suggested they consult with the government to make effective use of the $350 billion U.S. investment package. As part of Samsung's plan to invest some $310 billion at home over the next 5 years, its electronics arm said it will add a chip production line at its complex in Pyeongtaek. The P5 plant production line has been delayed since late 2023 amid slowing demand for chips for smartphones and PCs and oversupply, according to public company filings. But a global rush for AI chips has tightened supply, with semiconductor prices now surging. Samsung Electronics this month raised prices of certain memory chips by as much as 60% compared to September, sources told Reuters. Samsung said mass production at the plant, part of the world's biggest chip complex, will begin in 2028.
A rare earth squeeze is rattling global industries as China's export limits spark fears of shortages and soaring costs. While some restrictions have eased, long delays in license requirements mean companies are worried about keeping supply chains for rare earth elements running smoothly.
A new rare earth crisis could be growing, and it's got some global businesses worried. The element yttrium faces Chinese export restrictions, which has led to fears of shortages and surging costs. It's used by several major industries like aerospace, energy and semiconductor production. It's needed for specialty alloys found in engines as well as coatings to protect against high temperatures. China is the main source of the element, but Beijing restricted exports along with 6 other rare earths in April in retaliation for US tariffs. Industry hopes for a more reliable flow of minerals were raised last month after a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. But the dispute hasn't been fully resolved. While China has since paused some of its rare earth restrictions, its April controls remain in place. It's raised questions about access for US industry without a comprehensive deal between Washington and Beijing. Sources have said the controls require exporters to obtain licenses from Beijing and made it difficult to get yttrium out of China. They added licenses issued so far have been for small shipments, and there are still long delays getting material delivered. Data has shown European prices for yttrium oxide are up 4,400% since January. One leading US aerospace trade group said yttrium was essential to the world's most advanced jet engines, and it was working with Washington to expand domestic supply. Sources also said shortages are a major concern for the semiconductor industry, where yttrium is used as a protective coating and insulator.
To Google now, and its parent company Alphabet stock jumped over 5% in early trading after Berkshire Hathaway revealed a multi-billion-dollar stake in the tech giant. The move signals confidence in the company despite rising concerns over AI spending and valuations. It's a rare tech bet for the traditionally cautious investment powerhouse.
Alphabet shares rose 5.5% in pre-market trading on Monday. Investors jumped in after investing giant Berkshire Hathaway disclosed a stake in the tech firm. It marked what could be one of the final major moves by the group under Warren Buffett's leadership. A filing on Friday showed Berkshire owned 17.85 million shares in Google's parent as of September 30th. Reuters calculations showed the stake could be worth about $4.93 billion as of the stock's close. Berkshire's move comes as concerns grow over big tech's heavy artificial intelligence spending and whether AI valuations are too high. Buffett is due to end his 60-year run as CEO of Berkshire at the end of the year. It was unclear who made the specific purchase at Berkshire, though Buffett usually oversees the larger investments. Berkshire has traditionally avoided tech stocks. While Apple is the group's largest stock holding, Buffett argues it's a consumer products company rather than a technology bet.
Back to Asia, and Japan's economy slipped for the first time in 6 quarters, with GDP down 1.8% as US tariffs weighs on exports. While economists see the slowdown as mild and likely temporary, the government is preparing a $110 billion stimulus to help households weather rising living expenses.
Japan's economy shrank for the first time in 6 quarters over the 3 months through September. Figures out Monday showed GDP falling 1.8% as U.S. tariffs hit exports. Economists say the slowdown is milder than expected and likely temporary. They say the contraction also doesn't point to a recession, but may complicate any plans by the central bank to raise interest rates. The main hit came from exports, pressured by rising U.S. tariffs. Automakers saw shipments plunge after front-loading exports ahead of tariff hikes, though most absorbed the duties by cutting prices. Washington and Tokyo struck a September deal to apply a 15% tariff on nearly all imports from Japan, easing earlier rates of 27.5% on cars and 25% on other products. Capital spending, another key driver of private demand-led growth, rose 1% in the third quarter, far exceeding market estimates. However, private consumption, which makes up more than half of economic output, barely grew as high food costs dampened consumer spending. The Japanese government is compiling a stimulus package worth almost $110 billion to help households manage rising living costs.
Well, it's better news for the US and Switzerland, who have unveiled a new trade framework, cutting tariffs on Swiss imports from 39% to 15%, paving the way for $200 billion in Swiss investments in the US. The deal aims to boost jobs, stabilize exports, and open markets on both sides, though officials say a legally binding agreement is still in the works.
The United States and Switzerland announced a framework trade agreement on Friday that includes Washington slashing its tariffs on imported Swiss products to 15% from 39%. The deal also includes a pledge by Swiss companies to invest $200 billion in the U.S. by the end of 2028. The agreement puts Switzerland on an equal footing with the European Union. Here's Swiss Economy Minister Guy Parmelin.
Dieses Abkommen ist eine große Erleichterung.
This agreement is a great relief for our economy. The additional U.S. tariffs have already caused considerable damage and affected almost 40% of our exports. The Memorandum of Understanding now stabilizes the conditions for access to the U.S. market.
Nun die Bedingungen für den Zugang zum US-Markt.
However, we cannot relax. This non-binding Memorandum of Understanding is to be transformed into a legally binding agreement in the coming months.
Rechtsverbindliches Abkommen umgewandelt werden.
U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer said the agreement tears down long-standing trade barriers and opens new markets for American goods. He welcomed, quote, massive Swiss investment to help reduce our deficit in pharmaceuticals and other key sectors that will generate thousands of jobs across the U.S. The deal will have a positive impact on Switzerland's labor force, too, says Vincent Subilia, Director General of the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Services.
If you look at the US as the number one powerhouse and our second export market, and if you look at certain sector of activities, machinery, watchmaking, jewelry, or the medtech sector, which are part of the clusters here in Switzerland, and you look at the job, we're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs eventually, and it will help preserve jobs and tax revenues to the benefits of Switzerland.
The Swiss government said the lower tariff rate is likely to be activated within days or weeks, as soon as the U.S. customs processing systems can be adjusted. A White House statement said they aim to conclude negotiations to finalize the trade deal by the first quarter of next year.
And finally, this week looks set to be busy for markets and policymakers. US officials are clearing a backlog of delayed economic data, while traders keep an eye on Nvidia's quarterly results for clues on the AI boom. Let's take a look ahead to what we can expect.
From clearing the huge backlog of shutdown-delayed US data to new inflation data out of Japan and Europe, these are the stories to watch in business and finance in the coming week. U.S. government workers begin the task of shoveling out the backlog of data not released during the 43-day shutdown. Traders could get the September numbers in the coming days. Private data that has been published has suggested the labor market continues to weaken. That supports the case for a December Federal Reserve rate cut. Officials are warning, though, that some data may have been lost forever. NVIDIA's quarterly report on Wednesday will be a critical test for the AI trade. The semiconductor giant became the world's first $5 trillion company last month. Its valuation has edged down a bit since then, but it still has enough clout to easily sway markets on its own. The AI bellwether's forecasts and the broader industry perspective will have ramifications for the wider tech ecosystem. It is going to either ease or feed those nagging investor concerns that this is already the next big bubble. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is urging the Bank of Japan to go slow on raising rates, while new Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama has argued that inflation still hasn't sustainably hit the BOJ's 2% target. The bank still looks primed for a hike in December, although Governor Kazuo Ueda has been cautious about pulling the trigger. Consumer price data due on Friday should offer clues. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde says it is in a good place, with markets pricing in no interest rate moves at all next year. The coming week brings a raft of October inflation numbers for both individual countries and the Eurozone as a whole. Core consumer inflation has stayed around the ECB's 2% target for most of the year. But if the euro's rise starts to drag it lower at any point, Frankfurt would have room to cut again.
Well, that's your business news roundup for the day. It's been a good week for Google and for trade between the US and Switzerland, but tough times ahead for the Japanese economy. I'll be keeping an eye on all of the latest developments in business across the week. Back to you, Guy.
Katie, we thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, questions are growing inside COP30 as frontline communities warn they've been sidelined, raising doubts over how credible the summit's decisions can be without them. Welcome back to Prime Time. Now, at COP30 in the Amazon tonight, a central question is cutting through the noise. How credible can climate decisions be when the very communities who live on the front lines say they're being pushed to the margins? Indigenous groups are warning that without a seat at the table, the summit's promises risk falling flat. They're calling for something concrete, formal recognition of their lands as part of global climate policy, arguing that any roadmap without them simply won't work. Let's take a look.
The COP30 happening in Amazon, it is the home of indigenous peoples. It must include the people who can be in this COP. The way that they excluded indigenous peoples, the way that they take the badges is not what we expect from the decision making. It is not the COP of talks, it is the COP of action. There will be no action without indigenous peoples, without those who are protecting the land, the territories, the waters. And when we talk also about this COP here in Amazon, remember last year in the COP 29, we adopted the Baku work plan on indigenous peoples. Where are we with? If it is a continuation, the COP 30 must consider the Baku work plan on indigenous peoples and must give the voice, the seat for the indigenous peoples to be in the tables. I hope that this day too will be a turning point where the countries can think 2 times before taking any decision. And they have to take the decision with indigenous peoples and with indigenous people's voices. If people become hungry, because they are really feeling there is no action. And it is true. The fact is there. We are seeing the fires that are increasing. We are seeing the greenhouse gases emission who's increasing. So that means we are not acting enough. And that's what people are talking about. And that's what indigenous peoples are asking. If the people are mad, of course they can be mad because there is no action from the decision makers. They must take action right now in this COP.
And when the COP30 presidency describing this COP as a people's COP, do you think this description is actually deeply misleading?
So we said it is a people COP, but we say also it is a truth COP. So for us, the truth is getting the peoples in the COP in the middle of Amazon, not in the luxury houses, to see how it is hot, how it is humid, and how people are living there. But also the COP of peoples must have peoples that are taking the decisions inside. It is day 2. Hopefully that they will change their mind and they will take the voice of the peoples to be in all the decision making.
Nós estamos trabalhando muito.
We can include indigenous peoples and their territories as a measure to tackle climate change. We face several challenges: incursions by miners, illegal loggers, and unlawful livestock farming in these areas. There are numerous conflicts between indigenous communities and farmers, and here we are calling for the demarcation of indigenous lands. We want indigenous territories to be recognized as part of climate policy. And through this formal recognition, we can implement all other public policies, covering security, education, and health.
Now, AnewZ's Orkan Amashov was there, as we all saw, covering the event. He's now safely back at home, and I'm delighted to say with us in the studio tonight. Orkan, welcome home.
Thank you, Guy. Great to be back.
You were there all week. I think it's fair to say that we noticed from your reports, from our conversations, that there were many different things happening. There was a sense perhaps early on that there was some different perspectives, some trouble brewing, if you like. But when was it? When was your earliest sense of these concerns from indigenous groups starting to surface from inside the COP30 process?
The talk about indigenous movement and people belonging to that movement not being happy has been there all the time before the inception, before the start of COP30. I arrived there 2 days before the actual day 1 of the 30th meeting and conference of parties, and it was almost after, on the last day of that plenary of leaders, which took place from 6th to 7th of November. So that discontent was there from the very, very beginning, and still there, will be there till the end. I guess day 2, towards the end of day 2, on the 11th of November, we first heard about this number of people, about 50, 60 of them actually storming into the COP30 venue, explaining and demanding that they should be included as part of the process, explaining their dissatisfaction. That was the first visible, palpable manifestation of that. But that had been there from the very beginning. Basically, the idea there is that there's an Amazon basin, which is a very large territory. It's about 7 million square kilometers. And 5.5 of that is actually Amazon rainforest, which we describe as lungs of our planet. And there are 30 to 40 million people living there. According to some estimates, 30. According to other estimates, actually 40. And these people believe that their needs are very specific. They constitute quite a considerable section of Brazilian society. Their political affiliations and loyalties are very hard to describe. It's not about them being in favor of the President Lula or against Bolsonaro or vice versa. There has been some talk on day 2 when I spoke to a couple of delegates and also locals that there is a school of thought that actually these people are being used by opposition against the government. But many members of indigenous movement are actually in favor of the current president, because for the first time under his term watch, those people were allowed to be part of the government, and the lady that we heard before is actually the first minister responsible for indigenous affairs. So basically it has been there from the very beginning. Fundamental question here is that if you're making, as was the case in Baku, if you're making a decision which you want to work to be fair, just, equitable, you need to include everybody who is affected by that decision. And quite frankly, those people are at the forefront of that debate, and therefore they should be included, of course.
I mean, I suppose there's a sense in which, where's the surprise? I mean, as you say, this has been an issue that's been rumbling for some time. It can't have been, this is a sophisticated country with a sophisticated political ecosystem. It can't have been a complete surprise that this discontent may have raised, itself to the surface. Is there a failing here on behalf of the establishment or the incumbent political party in government to really take account of this and find ways to bring these groups into the debate sooner and deeper?
Well, the current government, the federal government, is firmly convinced that these people are actually part of the debate, and the lady, the first minister responsible for indigenous movement, is actually part of the government. The government's argument is that these people are already part of our society, they're involved in the decision-making process, therefore government is doing its level best. But the members of indigenous movement are saying that we may be part of the official structure, but when the decisions are being made about the future of Amazon Basin, about the funding that is needed to preserve that landmass, our specific needs are not taken into account. It's a question of land ownership. That goes to the root of the matter. Brazil is, of course, established as a nation as a result of European colonization. And naturally, when the nation formation process was happening, there was a certain section of this country to which the official government structures did not penetrate due to geographical reasons. And for them, really, in the European mindset, that area was terra incognito. They did not really at the beginning take into account the fact that people had been living here, indigenous people, and their right to land, their ownership was not an accepted norm for the government, federal government. It was only later that these rights were accepted. And currently the reality is that government is striking deals with several other foreign companies, foreign governments. And there's a question of Chinese investors, for example, funneling money into that area, ecological projects being underway, and the people who are members of indigenous community feel that decisions are being made without them being involved in the first place. And in return for those investments, these foreign actors, private actors and also private companies and state actors, getting certain reciprocal rights. These rights militate against their ownership rights. So it's a question of losing something which is yours. And these people are really worried about it. I mean, it's a very interesting debate there. I mean, I was trying to understand it when I was there. I was speaking to members of the government in Brazil. Some people are saying that there has been marked improvements in indigenous inclusion in decision making, which is probably true, I imagine. The First Lady is a very vivid example of that sort of thing. There are others say that no, it's only very superficial. In reality, the government is doing what they want to do. They want to keep an appearance of actually including those people. I think the reality is very complex. Probably truth lies somewhere in between.
And what was the consensus, Orkan? Because you spoke to a number of people. The people you spoke to who did represent the indigenous groups, was there consensus that there was a gap still between the sort of lip service, the rhetoric that was around the event and the sort of real involvement that they were having?
The organisers, COP30 presidency, from the very beginning has been trying to explain and also present this COP as people's COP. Sort of COP of reality, COP of the reality check, and move from what we call ambition, which is very important, to actually implementation.
Because the very decision to move, to have the COP in essentially the jungle.
Yeah.
You know, that, I mean, it was a very, very bold move in the first place, wasn't it?
It was an incredibly bold move, it was a very risky move in the first place. Naturally, the COP could have been organized somewhere in Rio, Salvador, or any other developed part of Brazil. Belém is not exactly the most developed part of Brazil, to put it mildly. Manaus is probably less relevant. The climate there is even more humid, and it would have been much, much difficult for delegates. But Belém itself is a relatively, of course, nice place in terms of the conditions present there. But ultimately, they wanted to show to the world that we are hosting this event at the gateway to the Amazon. This is a real problem. The Amazon basin is providing 10% of oxygen that our planet gets, and eventually the emblematic part of the story was there. But it was more about the spectacle, I suppose, but in terms of actually taking into account the needs of those people and specific needs associated with that part of Brazil, I think that a lot is to be done. Because practically, if you look at some of the initiatives presented there was one just before COP30, before day one, there was one about Tropical Forest Forever facility, 5 billion pledge. Nothing has come out of it as yet. Nothing has eventuated out of it. The locality matters a great deal, but people want to see practicable actions. There are two competing visions regarding what will come out of this COP. One vision is that in Baku there was a clear mandate. COP29 presidents who worked out flat out and around the clock, prepared a mandate that has been internationally sort of sanctioned and approved, and therefore on day 1 and 2 we had element of progress regarding those fundamental chunks of the climate diplomacy, including loss and damage fund, Article 6.2 and 6.4. But here it's not about tangible outcome now, but actually sort of a 6-axis formulating climate diplomacy, preparing what I would call fortuitous ground for decisions to be made at COP31 and later. So what they're trying to say, all in good time, do not be too much, do not be focused on results, announceables, focus on this substance, and substance is leading in the right direction. But it's a very relative notion. How do you know whether substance is leading in the right direction? People want to see pledges, people want to see commitments. People, fundamentally, they want this money. And as I said during our live connection on a number of occasions, we can talk about a number of things: adaptation, mitigation, peace, or peace-sensitive, water-sensitive, climate action. All of these terminologies are rooted on realistic notions. There is no doubt about that. But it's all about money being funneled into those areas where people they are actually impacted by climate change. And in the context of certain elements, that will happen soon. For example, loss and damage fund, 250 million already requested. And it seems that on the basis of interviews that I've conducted there with the executive director of Loss and Damage Fund, early 2026, that money will begin funneling, being flown into that area. But ultimately, people want to see action, and action is movement of money. What will happen by the end of this COP? I don't know. It's very difficult to say to respond to the question. Well, adaptation, 40 billion must be raised by the end of the year. It should have happened by now. It hasn't happened. According to NDCs, nationally determined contributions, according to the evaluation of those NDCs that have been submitted to the COP 2030 presidency and UNFCCC, it's very clear that, for example, by 2030, 2035, the greenhouse gas, this projection, the decline is that greenhouse gas emission is projected to decline by 12%. 12% is not good enough. We need to get 50, 60. That means more money for adaptation and for mitigation purposes. Is that money being raised or not? That's a fundamental question. Does not look like so to me.
It's interesting. It's almost like, Orkan, that sort of COP29 is proving to be a very, very hard act to follow, not least because, as you've described, the achievements were very clear, very concrete. There was a very organised and intense effort. There was disagreement, debate, argument, but it was very clear that the whole body of the group of people in that room, and also people watching in the media at home, were focused on whether or not these things were going to happen, and they did happen. This is a lot more ambiguous, and it's, as you say, it's almost like a reset, a setting off of the next achievements that, whether it's Turkey or Australia, will possibly then formulate into more concrete action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very difficult to establish with any degree of certainty what success will look like, how it will look like actually in the first place. From Baku to Belém roadmap has been unveiled by 2 presidencies. $1.3 trillion US must be raised, of course, by 2035. The current goal is $300 billion US. The structure of finance is incredibly interesting. So the improvement there is more or less palpable, but we need to be able to see something very, very concrete. Regarding a climate finance goal, the situation remains quite ambiguous, of course. And back to the nature of this COP, I think it would be fair to say the ambition from the very beginning was not incredibly high. Brazil is a massive country, big country. It's a massive country, really. It's smaller than the United States and China. My impression there was that it was very different to COP29 in Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan wanted to show to the world at large that this country, with a relatively small size, is capable of hosting one of the most important congregations around the world with absolute dedication, clarity and regimentality, and Azerbaijan has achieved their purpose. There's a degree of some sort of lackluster, lackadaisical proclivity which I've sort of noticed in the approach of the organizers there. They do not seem to be very ambitious and do not seem to be at all kind of determined to show to the world that they are actually capable of producing results.
Conscious of the scrutiny that Baku, yeah.
And also the similar element was quite palpable on the 6th and 7th of November when the President Lula was delivering his remarks during the plenary of leaders. More expectation from the world that give us some money. In the case of Azerbaijan, it's more about actually, we all understand developing countries substantial resources in order to be able to fight the adverse impacts of climate change. Of course, there's no doubt about that, but also actually producing that tangible outcome. So you need to have a large ambition in order to attain at least some part of it. I've not noticed in Brazil. My impression, and of course this impression is quite tentative, it may change after all on the basis of what we're going to see throughout this week, was that they're even preparing some sort of fortuitous ground for that glorious failure that we tried to do our level best, and developed countries are very greedy. They do not want to act in line with their historic responsibility. Even the perception related to that has emerged, but I'm sure it's quite tentative, and it probably will be subjected to further changes during this week.
Very interesting indeed. You were only there, obviously, for just over a week, but did you get a chance to get a sense of the wider political environment? Where are people in Brazil at the moment? You mentioned it's a very large country. It's a country where there's a lot of economic growth and development and opportunity, but also not everybody agrees on the right way forward.
Absolutely. It's a very diverse society. Indigenous population form one part of society. People of clear European descent who distinguish themselves from others, by the way. It's a very interesting case. The group of people within Brazil who are of European descent, they self-describe themselves as being one particular important section of society. I'm not entirely sure Argentina is the same, by the way, in that particular respect. So it's a very diverse, to a certain extent polarized society, of course, with indigenous people forming completely kind of detached group of people who feel that they have been adversely impacted and they should be included in the decision-making process. Political battle between Lula and Bolsonaro, that rift is there. Even there is a school of thought that Bolsonaro people are actually using indigenous movement people against the President Lula, and that sort of the moment when indigenous people stormed into COP30 was actually premeditated and instigated by them. Naturally, everybody there, like in many other southern countries, when you talk to taxi drivers, you talk to ordinary people, they're all political analysts, they have got their own opinion. Some of them could be quite self-opinionated. And by the way, I suppose Turkey and many other countries are not different in that particular respect. But there's a fundamental feeling that developed countries have got this responsibility, and this was particularly visible in respect to one moment, and we discussed during one of our live connections, that India criticized the European Union for what they call the violation of the fundamental principle lying at the heart of international climate law, that is common but differentiated responsibility in the context of that carbon mechanism, which is effectively a levy imposed on the carbon imports coming to the European Union, and that was supported by Brazil as well. It's a very interesting geopolitical atmosphere there. On one side, you see competition between India and China, which is visible there when it comes to the position maintained by developing countries. At the same time, you see the cooperation between them against the European Union, for example. It's a fascinating spectacle. A lot of geopolitics involved in this process. Naturally, the skepticism that is prevailing in the United States regarding UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, from which they actually withdrawn, was also part of the debate there. Some of the people I've spoken to actually were not able to grasp the notion of Conference of Parties, COP30. They were not even aware of that, because for them, the problems of Amazon River, from pollution to the problems related to their livelihoods, are daily affairs. They were not, some of them were not even aware of the fact that there was a big congregation happening not far away from the place where they live.
Wow.
Yet there's an element of detachment.
Fascinating stuff. Well, Ken, it's fantastic to have you back with us. Please don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break now and we'll be back with you. Okay, after the break, we'll be back at COP30. AnewZ spoke to Turkey's top climate negotiator. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. Now, let's return to one of the interviews that Orkan Amashov carried out during his time at the summit and set the scene before we bring him in again. While in Brazil, he visited the Turkish pavilion at COP30 and spoke with the delegation's chief negotiator, the Deputy Minister of Ecology, Urbanisation and Climate. Let's take a look.
I'm joining you from COP30 venue today, where negotiations are underway. Of course, one of the most central issues that has been discussed here is who will actually ultimately host COP31. There are two contenders, Turkey and Australia. My guest today is Fatma Varank, Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate, and also Chief Climate Negotiator on behalf of Turkey. Thank you very much indeed for this distinct privilege. I'm so grateful to you. My first question to you is going to be about this battle between Turkey and Australia. How likely is it that Turkey will eventually emerge as a country which will host COP31?
Çok yakınız. Bir adım mesafesi artık önümüzde bir yol kaldığını düşünüyorum.
We are very close. There is now only one step ahead of us. COP30 has begun, and a decision is expected during its second week. Turkey has been engaged in these negotiations for 2 years, together with Australia. However, at this stage, Turkey has clearly demonstrated its willingness and desire to host the COP. Our country was represented at the Leaders' Summit by Vice President Mr Cevdet, while Australia did not participate at the same level. Following the start of COP30, we continue our negotiations, facilitated by both Azerbaijan and Brazil. There is also a letter from our President. If a joint COP with Australia does not materialise, Turkey's wish to host the COP independently has been clearly expressed, and this letter was delivered to the Australian Prime Minister a few days ago. We believe Turkey is very close to achieving this, and we are confident we will succeed. Many countries are supporting us, both within Turkey's group and from outside. We believe we will be the voice for many developing countries. Turkey also has the potential to act as a bridge between developed and developing countries. We consider Turkey to be one of the few countries capable of doing this.
Thank you very much indeed. And ultimately, you said that Turkey can actually play a role of bridge between developing and developed countries. What factors do you think favour Turkey's position now?
Bizim tabii şöyle Türkiye'nin lehine olan faktörler şu. Bir kere bunu istiyoruz 2 yıldır.
The factors in Turkey's favour are as follows. Firstly, we want this. Secondly, we have been pursuing this for 2 years together with Australia. However, we have never shied away from negotiations, nor from organising a joint COP. A consensus text had been agreed, but later Australia withdrew from it and expressed their intention to hold a Pacific COP. We have communicated that we respect their concerns and will address them within the COP agenda. Nonetheless, we have consistently been the side taking the initiative in negotiations, while Australia has often taken a step back. I believe the side seeking consensus will prevail, as other countries can see this. As you know, this will be a VEO-CCOP. The time for the Pacific COP has not yet come. Nevertheless, we will bring the Pacific's concerns onto the COP agenda.
COP gündemimizde taşıyacağımızı ifade ediyorum buradan.
Thank you, Fatma. I'm very grateful to you and I wish you all the best in your hard work. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, from Belém to here in Baku, we're delighted to have Orkan Amashov with us still in the studio. Orkan, pretty positive statements there, one step away, officials have said. Did you get a sense when you spoke to officials like that Turkey is pretty confident about the result?
Turkey is pretty confident about its capabilities of garnering support and ultimately hosting COP31. Number one reason, they're incredibly enthusiastic about it, and their perception of themselves is that this is the only country, one of the few countries around the world, which can actually be a true kind of connector, bridge between developing and developed countries. Because Turkey is a technically developing country, we know that. Their classification under UNFCCC Paris Agreement is slightly different. It comes to the money they're receiving, but ultimately they have concerns of developing countries, plus due to their geographical position, geopolitical clout, they're not really developing country in a sense of other developing countries. There's a mighty power, and at a certain stage it will be developed country. Therefore, they feel that they can speak for both worlds. It's a nation of two worlds, and that gives them that sense of confidence. The number two factor, I suppose, is that they believe that they work together with Australia, and they could have actually hosted it together, and that would have been a reasonable thing to do. And how would that work, if you ask me? That might work in the following year. That's plenary of leaders, which in the case of Brazil was actually prior to the day one of COP30, might be held in one country, and the actual COP itself, the 30th meeting of Conference of Parties, could be held in another, giving an impression that it's being hosted in two different parts of the world. Australia is not very happy. They believe that Australia and other Pacific islands should host the Pacific COP. Turkey believes that they can actually be reflective of the needs of that part of the world. So ongoing battle, it's a geopolitical battle as well. Again, Turkey is a very unique country. I mean, if you ask me if Turkey is a global north or global south country, answer to that question will not be crystal clear. It's not global north in a sense that it's not part of the European Union, it's not part of the classical Western alliance, if you like, but it's not. It has never been colonized by anybody. Has always maintained its statehood, even during the difficult days of the late Ottoman Empire. Therefore, their feeling is that they're both global north and global south. They're a member of NATO, for example, which makes them global north in that particular sense. So Turkey's fundamental argument is that it's a country with a complicated identity, which is actually fortune, the asset for this particular purpose, and therefore, as we can see in the example of distinguished Deputy Minister of Ecology, Urbanization and Climate, they are indeed very confident and they feel very righteous about their agenda and ambitions.
And obviously many people now are looking at this, trying to figure out, well, which way will this go? Where is the momentum headed? There was a sense in which, from some of your reports, that Turkey is sort of driving the process forward, whereas Australia potentially could be seen to be stepping back. How accurate is that, or is that to some degree wishful thinking on the part of Turkey?
It could be. There could be an element of wishful thinking. There could be a sort of sense of self-serving kind of truth in this, to a certain extent. We need to be open-minded about everything if we want to really analyze things properly. But there is a considerable truth in what they're saying when it comes to their hard work together and sort of implicit understanding with Australia that they could host it together, and that's part of their argument, of course, is not wishful thinking, but actually the reflection of reality. But we'll see what will happen. It's global North countries, including other countries, including the Western European nations, European Union. They're very supportive of Australia, because Australia, despite being despite not being part of Europe, still considered part of the Western civilization. Whereas Turkey is largely supported by developing countries. So we will see. It's going to be incredibly tough battle. I cannot predict. This would be irresponsible of me, because on the basis of information I have, my own evaluation needs more information to assume this definable shape and argumentative shape. But ultimately, if neither side wins the argument, It will be held in Bonn, in Germany, where the UNFCCC headquarters is located, and no one wants that outcome, to be honest with you. No one wants, including Germans.
So that you feel that's unlikely?
I believe, or rather I hope, it is unlikely. But in addition to hoping is never good enough. In addition to hoping, there is also belief that it's not, because normally in this sort of multilateral negotiation, when there are different stakeholders involved, exerting influence, quite often last minute you get this, what do you call it, 12-hour decision? The 12-hour decision, 12-hour compromise.
It's very interesting. You can
11th hour, sorry.
11th hour. Yeah, you can see the passion with which your guest there was pushing forward
very forceful,
Turkey's candidacy. There's nothing to suggest, though, that there's any animosity between Turkey and Australia. In fact, there's been quite a lot of very positive diplomacy between the two countries, hasn't there?
They are very friendly. I've always been very friendly from the very beginning. Interestingly enough, the Battle of Gallipoli back in 1915, where Ottoman Empire was attacked by allies, including Britain, and there were many Australians being involved, actually gave rise to common shared past history, with common sort of tragedy, because a lot of people died, but also the degree of commonality which binds these two nations together. Their relations, bilateral relations between Turkey and Australia, are incredibly positive. And the lady in question has been very, very clear about that. And her dissatisfaction was about, we've done a lot of work together. There was a clear understanding that we're moving in the right direction. You must be absolutely sure that we will be able to express and address the concerns of that world, the Pacific world, where Australia is a key player. Why on earth you are letting us down? This is Turkish position. Australian position is that, well, two countries cannot host COP31. It's against UNFCCC, which is a very moot point, of course. It's a matter of compromise and consensus, nothing set in stone as such. And when Australia is hosting this event with other Pacific nations, does not this go against the grain of UNFCCC in the first place? So it's really a number of debatable things. But what matters, COP31 should be hosted by one of these nations, and it should be a massive success, building upon the attainments which hopefully will be gained here in Brazil.
To what extent is the decision-making criteria for COP similar to other big events like the Olympic Games or the World Cup, for example?
It's far more complicated.
Just bring us into that.
It's far more complicated. There are different groups, there are different interest groups. There is an element of rotation there. It's a very intricate set of rules. I cannot claim to be the authority on that knowledge. Simply, I haven't had a chance to go through them very carefully. Perhaps next time we can discuss it with a degree of clarity later. But basically, it is part of that wider geopolitical battle. If you host COP30 in one part of the world, you cannot again host it in that part of the world. There must be an element of rotation. You have to receive sufficient support. Consensus is key. It's not a question of majority, it's a question of consensus. You have to make sure that no country opposes your candidacy. In the case of Azerbaijan, when Azerbaijan was hosting COP, well, eventually elected, or rather selected, as a country as a host of COP29, there was a lot of political shilly-shallying going on there, shenanigans being involved, with France, of course, naturally opposing Azerbaijani candidacy, and ultimately there was a pressure on all the parties to make sure that Azerbaijan is properly elected as a host country. Something of that nature should happen again. There's no consensus as such emerging as yet. It will be more complicated than any other congregation, any other form or process leading to the election of a certain host country. Therefore, one does not know really what will happen. And the default option of this Conference of Parties, 31st meeting of Conference of Parties being held in Bonn, it's a remote possibility, but it is not as unlikely as some of us may think.
That's very interesting indeed. And Turkish officials have been talking about bringing Pacific concerns onto the agenda, as we've just discussed. What do you think that tells us about how they're positioning themselves in the wider negotiations?
Well, Turkey is a rising power with geopolitical credentials, and they perfectly understand that one way of actually increasing your clout and your presence, your network, is to make sure when you make a statement of political nature anywhere else in the world, you are being perceived not just as a reflection or rather country indicative of the interests of that particular region, but also entire world. Turkey as a country is vying for global recognition. They believe they're perfectly entitled. And they feel that geographically, bearing in mind their location, bearing in mind their connection with many developing countries, including those countries sharing the same predicament as Pacific Islands and Pacific world at large, Turkey is in a better position. They are diplomatically, of course, growing in terms of their embassies all around the world. Their diplomacy is incredibly strong. It dates back to 18th, 17th century, and their relation with Australia has given them sense that they can actually achieve compromise with Australia. And they received a huge amount of support from developing countries, including, by the way, Russia. As far as it's a very fascinating moment. Turkey is not in the same camp as Russia. There's no doubt about that. But Russia has been playing this geopolitical, coppish sort of games in order to win support from Turkey, in order to use the reciprocal steps that might follow as a result of this support for some different purposes there. So Turkey is in a very interesting, really, geopolitical position, but Western European countries, European Union, they are not supporting Turkey, which is their downside, which is a drawback for them. But it'll be a long battle. Let's see what will happen. And the decision regarding that is likely to be made by the end of this week.
Very interesting indeed.
And by the way, let me just add this. Organisers themselves, COP30 presidency, when I had my conversations with them, they're not happy with the fact that when COP30 is being sort of held in Brazil, everybody naturally needs to focus on the tangible outcomes emanating from this meeting of Conference of Parties. Everybody actually is talking about who will host next COP31, next COP, next Conference of Parties. They feel that this debate, its extent, is undermining their own centrality.
It hasn't quite worked for them.
Not yet. No.
Very interesting indeed. Orkan, it's a delight to have you back in the studio with us.
Thank you very much, Guy. Great pleasure to be back.
Okay, after the break, we'll be taking a look all around the latest social media stories with AnewZ's Guli Garadagli. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Guli Garadagli is here to dive into the world of social media. Guli, what have you got for us today?
Socials are full of all sorts of updates from Israel, Washington, UK, even Baku. There's a lot, so let's get into it. Over in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu makes his position clear once again on one of the region's most contentious issues, Palestinian statehood. Here's what he said.
Our opposition to a Palestinian state in any territory west of the Jordan River, this opposition exists, is valid and has not changed one bit. I have been rebuffing these attempts for decades, and I am doing it both against pressure from outside and against pressure from within. So I do not need affirmations, tweets, or lectures from anyone. The issue of the alleged non-demilitarization of the part of Gaza that is in the hands of Hamas, there will be no such thing. Even in the 20-point plan and in everything else, this territory will be demilitarized and Hamas will be disarmed. Either this will happen the easy way or it will happen the hard way. This is what I said, and this is what President Trump also said. The second thing is also done by a minority that enters Judea and Samaria and does not represent the large public of settlers who are law-abiding and loyal to the state. And against them, too, these riots, both against IDF soldiers, against Palestinians, as well as against IDF soldiers, we will act against this with full force because we are a state of law, and a state of law acts according to the law.
Big statement is Israel, and now a twist in Washington. President Trump had an interesting update. It seems like after all the pressure and military buildup, he's suddenly open to a conversation.
You said Venezuela wants to talk. What does that mean?
Venezuela would like to talk. What does it mean? You tell me. I don't know.
You want to talk to them?
I talk to anybody. I talk to you, right? I talk to anybody. We'll see what happens. It allows us to do that, but we haven't said we're going to do that. And we may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out. They would like to talk.
Over in Britain, another big update. Immigration has been front and center in British politics lately, and now the government is making major changes to how asylum works. Here's the update.
New reforms will do is change that generations-old assumption that sanctuary provided to refugees
can very quickly lead to permanent settlement and all of the rights that go alongside that. We will be changing that to a more temporary process, and the situation will be assessed every 2.5 years. So if your country becomes safe in that intervening period and you are remaining on this essentially core protection model, you will be returned to your country, because we see countries that have started off in conflict and people have moved in order to escape that conflict becoming safe. So I think that is right.
And
but the whole of the proposals that I will set out tomorrow will also provide new routes for people to be able to work in this country. And if you are working and contributing, you will be able to earn an earlier settlement in this country. And the totality of that package will promote fairness and contribution.
But just on that point of...
One of my real frustrations since I've been in this job is often we have a set of rules and we don't enforce them properly. And the work of my predecessor, Yvette Cooper, when she was Home Secretary, and myself, is to make sure that the system itself, the administration, the bureaucracy that does work and that we are enforcing the rules that we have. But the totality of the reforms that I will be setting out are designed to bring our system back into order and into control, so that we can then also continue to provide sanctuary to those people who are fleeing wars from all over the world through new safe and legal routes, which I will do as well. Well, the situation in relation to Ukraine, actually, that was a bespoke and always intended to be a temporary scheme.
So they
to
would
provide
all have to
people
go home if the
with the
country becomes
respite,
peaceful.
to provide people with the respite because they're displaced by conflict. In fact, because it's a bespoke regime, they're not in fact considered refugees in the normal run of things. It is a bespoke scheme for Ukrainians, which I'm very proud that this country did, and we will always fulfil our obligations under that scheme. And of course, it is the wish of most of those Ukrainian individuals that one day they will return to Ukraine once the conflict is over.
Now, enough politics. Let's talk about something everyone enjoys, football. Over the weekend, Baku was buzzing because every single seat at Tofik Bahramov Stadium was taken. Azerbaijan faced France and fans showed up for a little football magic. Our Narchechek Jahangirli was there to bring us all of the updates.
All tickets for the match have been sold out. Tofik Bahramov Stadium, with over 31,000 seats, is completely full because Azerbaijan is playing against France tonight. It's no secret that France are the favorites in this game, but football is full of surprises. And since the Azerbaijani players have said they feel ready for this clash, who are we not to expect a miracle? The first game in Paris ended with a 3-0 win for the French side. This is the final match in Group D. France have already secured their place at the 2026 World Cup, leading the group with 13 points. Iceland are second with 7 points, followed by Ukraine. Azerbaijan are on 1 point, and the home side has already said goodbye to its North America dream. Yesterday we heard from Ayhan Abbasov, the head coach of the Azerbaijani team. He said this was a very tough group, but added that they will take a unique approach tonight, analyzing the opponents and looking to attack. Meanwhile, Didier Deschamps said that even if big names like Kylian Mbappe and Ousmane Dembele won't play tonight, France are fully focused on scoring goals and that winning is the only option. Tonight's match will be officiated by Andris Treimanis of Latvia. For now, stay tuned to AnewZ as we will be back with the result. It's Narchechek Jahangirli and Zohrab Shirinov reporting from Baku.
Every once in a while, an event comes along that makes the whole city feel alive. For Baku, it was the International Arts Festival. 2 weeks of music, theater, dance, and stories. Our very own İlknur Seydamirova was there to capture everything.
When was the last time that art took you into a moment that you wish that it would just stay a bit longer? Today we are experiencing exactly that at Baku International Arts Festival.
I am very happy that these anniversary celebrations continue, and today is the final concert in our beautiful native Philharmonic Hall. A very beautiful festival has been organized in Baku, an international festival with interesting events, performances, and today's final concert at the Philharmonic Hall. Renowned violinist Dmitry Sitkovetsky.
I am very happy that today, this evening, we will be performing at the closing ceremony of this great festival. This is truly a very brilliant festival comprising the most modern genres, from dramatic genres to contemporary ballet and symphonic music. I am sure that this is very important, and for the guests, it is a great opportunity to see the new city, to watch the new performances.
No, violin was all for centuries was called the king of instruments because that it had been played by the giants, legendary violinists like Paganini, like Sarasate, Wieniawski, and Joachim. And in the 20th century, Jascha Heifetz brought it to an incredible, Fritz Kreiser, Jascha Heifetz, Yehudi Menuhin, and also people like my father, Julian Sitkovetsky, Leonid Kogan, of course, David Oyster. They were incredible, galaxy of stars. And they had phenomenal following. People, it just touches one's heart. My violin, which was made in Cremona by the great Niccolo Amati, was made in 1651 in Cremona. So those are great pieces of art, but they're living and they're sounding and they go straight to one's heart.
While Baku celebrated art, Paris went sparkle mode. Paris never does anything halfway, including Christmas lights. The Champs-Élysées is officially glowing for the season, so here's your dose of sparkle. If Barbie has a movie, why not a Labubu, right? This year, Labubu took over TikTok, Instagram, your bank account. Looks like they're coming to the cinema too. That's all I've got for you today. Don't forget to check our website at AnewZ.tv. And as always, check us out on all of the social media platforms. Now back to you, Guy.
Fabulous selection as always, Guli. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now let's take a look at some other major stories from around the world. Chile's presidential election heads to a runoff on the 14th of December, with Janet Jara and Jose Antonio Cast going head-to-head. Jara led the first round with 27% and Cast close behind on 24%, setting up a December vote that will determine Chile's political path.
The runoff sets the stage for a clash between two sharply contrasting visions. Jara, the first Communist Party member to be a finalist, has promised to lift the minimum wage, broaden access to healthcare and welfare, and clamp down harder on organized crime.
The need to move toward more effective immigration control is to strengthen public safety, and that is why together we are going to strengthen the police and preventive measures. We are going to insist that Chile lift banking secrecy and follow the dirty money trail. To those who refuse, like Cast, presidential candidate Jose Antonio Cast, to lift banking secrecy, I say, he who does nothing fears nothing.
Meanwhile, Cast is campaigning on a law and order platform, having been turned away by voters in 2021 For positions seen as too radical, he now finds an opportunity among citizens concerned about crime and immigration.
Today, it became clear that the opposition defeated a failed government, a government that did not know how to lead the country. The only real victory, the only victory that will make us celebrate, is when we defeat organized crime and drug trafficking. The real victory will be when we close our borders to illegal immigration. The real victory will be when Chileans have decent jobs and Chile returns to growth. Unlike what has happened until now.
Chilean President Gabriel Boric extended his congratulations to the both of them.
I congratulate Janet Jara and José Antonio Cast on advancing to the second round. Sunday, December 14th, Chile will hold its presidential election, electing the country's next leader who will govern for the next 4 years.
This was Chile's first election with automatic compulsory voter registration. With the country divided and no clear majority, the December runoff will determine whether Chile stays left-leaning or shifts sharply right.
Around 3 billion people face some kind of housing inadequacy in the world, and more than 300 million experience being homeless globally. That's according to figures from the World Urban Forum, a conference that will be held in Azerbaijan in May next year, which will be looking forward to finding practical solutions. In readiness, a hybrid briefing session began on Monday in Baku.
Members of the diplomatic corps accredited in Azerbaijan gathered for a briefing session in Baku on Monday. It's ahead of preparations of the United Nations World Urban Forum next year in May. The conference aims to find solutions for housing problems around the world, with around 1.1 billion people living in informal settlements or slums globally.
Step by step, Baku is preparing to host the 13th UN World Urban Forum next year. Today's briefing is one of the key indicators of this process. The session outlines the forum's main goals and ongoing preparations for the diplomatic corps.
This is the first time Azerbaijan will host a summit of heads of state and government within the WUF framework. Baku's Urban Week will also take place ahead of this main event. Additionally, it's been confirmed that the Olympic Stadium will be the primary location for the forum. Attention is also shifting to Azerbaijan's regions, where significant urban development initiatives are underway.
Although the 15-minute city model is widely used globally, Azerbaijan plans to apply an even more compact 5-minute city model in the Karabakh region. All newly restored settlements in the liberated territories will be built according to smart city principles. Urban planning is underway for 12 cities, with master plans already approved for 8 of them and nearing completion for 4 more. Additionally, hundreds of villages are set for reconstruction. The rebuilding process across all settlements is expected to take 20 years.
As preparations continue, volunteer engagement is becoming another major component of the forum's operational plan.
WUF in Baku, Azerbaijan in May 2026 is indeed quite different. We have a number of new initiatives and programs integrated. We will be a lot more action-oriented and action-focused at the World Urban Forum. To give you an example, we will have a dedicated space at the World Urban Forum 13 to showcase global solutions and global practices related to adequate housing and sustainable urban development.
According to UN representatives, the conference will differ significantly from previous editions, introducing a more action-driven and innovative format.
WUF in Baku, Azerbaijan in May 2026 is indeed quite different. We have a number of new initiatives and programs integrated. We will be a lot more action-oriented and action-focused at the World Urban Forum. To give you an example, we will have a dedicated space at the World Urban Forum 13 to showcase global solutions and global practices related to adequate housing and sustainable urban development.
The 13th session of World Urban Forum is scheduled to take place in Baku from the 17th of May until the 22nd next year. The forum is organised through a collaboration between the UN Human Settlements Programme and the Azerbaijani government.
Well, at the World Telecommunication Development Conference 2025 event in Baku, we spoke exclusively to Pakistan's telecommunications minister. Let's take a listen.
Over the last 5 years, Pakistan has shown an industrial growth of almost 20% on average. We have a very resilient, very innovative, entrepreneurial young population. Of the 240 million people, 60% are young people. These boys and girls are heavily contributing to the tech sector and innovation in the country. We are right now focusing on a universal connectivity, resilient, meaningful connectivity across the country. For that, we have increased our submarine cable connectivity. We are also working on the optic fiber connectivity across Pakistan. And like you mentioned, we're working on our satellite connectivity regulations right now to finalize them to enable our people, our population with satellite internet, especially those in the far-flung areas. And same for the sector itself. We have around 600,000 IT professionals who are considered some of the best in the world, not only in terms of quality competitiveness, but also cost competitiveness. So in all of these areas, including the startup ecosystem, we feel that there is a lot of opportunity for Azerbaijan and Pakistan to collaborate. Already we are collaborating on the e-gov side. Azerbaijan does extremely well in the e-government index, and the SAPSI of Azerbaijan, which is looking after the Asan Khidmat organization, we are in direct contact, and we're making the first Asan Khidmat Center in Islamabad as we speak.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis and perspectives from here in Baku and around the world. And from all of us here at AnewZ, thanks for watching.